Gun controllers are gonna hate this video. Yeah, I try to make all my videos like that, but this one really cuts to one of the core roots. You see, a lot of the nerds, that's code for attorneys, are arguing about whether or not an obscure English law from the 1300s should basically destroy the Second Amendment. And if you don't believe me, they are arguing this law called the Statute of Northampton in courts across the United States today. In this video, we're gonna be talking about two English trials that happened from the 1500s and the 1600s that concretely established that anti-gunners are just plain wrong yet again by shedding light on what the English legal interpretation and view was on that statute. So guys, without further ado, let's get into it. We know a lot of American Second Amendment law comes from way of the colonies, which comes from way of England. And English law is directly cited in American precedent. We're talking about English law before the American Revolution, which means the next two cases you're going to hear about actually really dang important. In 17th century England, so we're talking the 1600s, in 17th century England, the right to bear arms was a contentious issue shaped by legal statutes, social customs, and political upheaval. Two cases, those of Sir Thomas Figett and Sir John Knight, offer critical insights into how English law addressed the carrying of arms, particularly under the hotly debated Statute of Northampton, still relevant, still debated, still cited in the United States Supreme Court, despite coming from 14th century England. These two cases, set against a backdrop of religious strife, civil conflict, and evolving notions of public safety, highlight the tension between individual rights and collective security. To fully grasp their significance, we have to first examine the armed laws that framed them, then explore the details of each case and the broader implications. The cornerstone of armed laws in England was the Statute of Northampton, enacted in 1328 under, that's right, I know some of you, someone shouted it, Edward III. Very good. Give yourself a gold star if you got that. This statute prohibited individuals from, quote, coming with force and arms before the king's justices, end quote, or, quote, going or riding armed in a fray of peace, end quote. In other words, terrorizing people, disturbing the peace. It's not just going armed in a fray of peace. People forget that. We're going to come back to that. With penalties including forfeiture of armor, imprisonment at the king's pleasure. Designed to curb the terror caused by armed retinues in a volatile medieval society, the statute was later reaffirmed in 1396 under Richard II, very good. Someone out there got it. Let me know in the comments section if you got either of these, which introduced fines to strengthen the enforcement. Now, by the 17th century, so some 300 years later, the statute's application had become, at best, nuanced, with courts focusing on the intent to cause fear or disturbance, as captured by the phrase, as I mentioned before, in a fray of peace. This important interpretation and application that the courts used is pivotal, and pivotally comes out for our purposes here today to understand the history of the Second Amendment in both Figett's and Knight's cases. English law also reflected a complex interplay of custom and restriction. Gentlemen commonly carried swords and pistols for self-defense, especially in an era marked by the English Civil War. Anyone? 1642 to 1651, as well as the Restoration of 1660 and the Glorious Revolution. Anyone got that? I'll stop doing it. 1688 to 1689. The 1670 Game Act, we've covered that here before, limited firearms possession to basically just the wealthy elite, reinforcing the class-based control over arms, while the 1689 Bill of Rights guaranteed Protestants the right to bear arms, albeit under strict regulation to prevent threats to the monarchy. Local bylaws, such as those in cities like Bristol, sometimes prohibited carrying arms within municipal boundaries, adding further complexity. These laws and customs set the stage for the legal dispute we're about to get into for Sir Thomas Figett and Sir John Knight. Anytime you have a law, it's really important to understand that there sometimes is a marked difference between how it's written and how it's enforced. Both of those are highly relevant to the Second Amendment here today. One of the few glimpses into this is the first case we're going to be talking about, which is Sir Thomas Figett, which occurred in the late 16th century, so late 1500s, and it provides a window into the early interpretations of the Statute of Northampton. The earliest surviving account from Richard Crompton's 1584 treatise, the office, and I'm translating this, basically the Office of the Authority and Justices of Peace, it's written in a different language, states, quote, "A man will not go armed overtly, even though it be for his defense, but it seems that a man can go armed under his private coat of plate, underneath his coat, etc., because this cannot cause any fear among people," end quote. It means that it suggests that Figett's case centered on the distinction between overt and concealed arming, with the latter deemed far less threatening and therefore not cause any affray. Edward Coke's The Third Part of the Institutes of the Laws of England from 1644 provides further detail describing Sir Thomas as the person who, quote, "went armed under his garments as well as in the palace as before the justices of the King's Bench," end quote. Coke's account basically implies that armed likely referred to wearing protective body armor, such as a haubergian, which is a sleeveless coat of chainmail, rather than carrying a weapon, given that the item was concealed beneath Figett's garments. Figett's defense, as recorded by Coke, reinforces this interpretation. He said there had been a debate between him and Sir John Trevet. So Figett got into this argument with Sir John Trevet, who was a knight in the same week at Paul's in London, who menaced him, so who threatened him, and therefore, for doubt of danger, in other words, he was concerned about being hurt, and safeguard of his life, he went so armed under his garments. This defense highlights Figett's claim that he wore armor for self-protection, prompted by a credible threat from Sir John Trevet. The court's apparent acceptance of this argument suggests that concealed armor did not violate the Statute of Northampton because it did not terrify the king's subjects, or interium populi, if you really insist on the Latin. This was then further backed up by William Hawkins, who in a 1716 A Treatise of the Pleas of the Crown further supports this view, noting that persons armed with privy coats of mail to defend themselves against their adversaries are not within the meaning of this Statute of Northampton, because they do nothing interium populi. In other words, they do nothing to terrorize people. Hawkins also distinguishes between wearing weapons and armor, stating that persons of quality are in no danger of offending against this statute by wearing common weapons, and that those armed with concealed armor for defense are similarly exempt. Figett's case likely adjudicated somewhere around the 1570s or maybe early 1580s, thus established an early precedent that intent and visibility were critical in applying the Statute of Northampton. By wearing armor discreetly for self-defense, Figett avoided the statute's penalties, reflecting a legal system that prioritized public perception over an absolute prohibition on arming. That's important. That affray, that public perception, the terror, is absolutely part of this. It's not simply did you go armed, it's did you go armed to affray. Now this case, though less famous than the one we're about to cover, that of Knights, underscores the nuanced interplay between personal security and public order in Elizabethan England. Now by contrast, Sir John Knight's case in 1686, almost 100 years later, is a landmark in the history of armed weapons laws, offering a much clearer and more dramatic illustration of these tensions. So in Bristol, a city known for its privateering and religious divisions, Knight, a wealthy Protestant merchant, was charged under the Statute of Northampton for walking about the streets armed with guns and entering Sir Michael's church during divine service with a firearm, allegedly to terrify the king's subjects. The trial occurred under James II, and this is important because James II was a Catholic monarch whose reign fueled Protestant fears of popish plots. Knight, a militant Protestant, claimed that he carried arms for self-defense, citing prior attacks or threats by Catholic partisans. His actions in Bristol were likely a provocative assertion of Protestant rights, though he framed them as being productive only. At the King's Bench, at trial, the prosecution argued that Knight's armed presence violated the statute of Northampton by causing public fear. Knight's defense, led by attorney Winnington, countered that the statute targeted those who went armed to terrify the king's subjects with malicious intent, malo animo, malicious intent, not those acting in self-defense. Chief Justice Sir John Holt agreed with the defense, noting that the statute was, quote, almost gone in desuetudinem, that's to say it's fallen to disuse. It's never been used or has not recently been used, as gentlemen routinely carried arms for security. Holt's ruling clarified that only arming with intent to terrorize violated the statute, a standard that Knight did not meet. The jury acquitted Knight, which came as no surprise to later scholars like Joyce Malcolm, who we've interviewed here multiple times on this channel before, who saw it as a bold affirmation of individual rights to bear arms. And by bearing, we're talking about carrying them around. Knight's acquittal had lasting implications. It redefined the statute in Northampton, or at least it made it unambiguously clear as a prohibition on terror-inducing arming, which aligned with the 1689 Bill of Rights, which codified Protestant rights under regulation. The case also reflected social hierarchies. Knight's status as a prominent figure may have likely influenced the outcome, whereas a commoner may have faced harsher judgment and probably would not have had such a prominent defense attorney. Some historians, like Patrick Charles, suggest that Knight's acquittal stemmed from his role as an informal enforcer of anti-Catholic laws, but the trial records emphasized the intent-based interpretation over those claims. Either way, the cases of Figett and Knight illustrate the evolution of armed laws in England and unambiguously make clear, at least at that point in time, in the 1500s and 1600s, how courts and the population construed the statute of Northampton. In Figett's case, rooted in Elizabethan concerns about personal feuds, established that concealed armor for self-defense did not violate the statute of Northampton, emphasizing intent and visibility. Knight's case, set in the volatile Restoration era, extended this logic to firearms, affirming that carrying weapons without malicious intent was indeed lawful. Both cases reflect a legal system adapting to a violent society where personal security often necessitated arming, yet public order demanded a level of restraint. I could keep going on, but I think you get it. The next time you hear someone talking about the statute of Northampton, remember Figett and Knight, and also remember another video that we have talking about, was the statute of Northampton even talking about weapons at all? Or was it actually only talking about armor? Be sure to check that one out as well. I appreciate you sticking around. Let's get to our ever popular quote of the day. This one comes from Thomas Jefferson, who once wrote, quote, "I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery." Again, appreciate you sticking around. I look forward to your comments on this one as always, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.